What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the DK Garage. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Joe.
Well, that basically went about as everyone expected. I don't know how you felt about it. Obviously, I loved all the festivities, all the hype, but even though I respect the heck out of what that number 5 team is doing, that was a little bit of a boring race.
It was boring, but it was domination. It was something we kind of anticipated. We talked about, well, let's see where he qualifies. We got to see where he qualified on the pole, and he really didn't do anything but lead and led a lot. His teammates looked good in portions. Chase Elliott led a handful of laps. So did William Byron. Even Bowman led a few. But, yeah, it was – Team Hendrick looked very, very, very strong again.
They're on a heater right now, for sure.
Absolutely. But Larson, it was pure and utter domination. He had 157 DraftKings points. If you're here following us for that, you know how much of an impact he had on that race from the very beginning.
Almost a 14 value, which is insane. We're typically seeing guys on a good day in that 7 to 8 range on the value scale, and I mean, he almost doubled that. He basically did double that. Kind of made for, like I said, a little bit of a boring race, at least up front. But there was some good action throughout the race. I mean, it wasn't a complete snooze fest by any means. We've seen those in the past. It was a fun race. But, yeah, just not a lot of action up front. Would have enjoyed a little bit more, but it is what it is. But like you said, Hendrick they are in control of this series right now. I'm just wondering if they're potentially peaking a little too soon or if they've even really begun to peak yet.
It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out and develops because you're right. It's one of those things that we're questioning. Where at in the process, where at in the season are they? We see them kind of get in a role typically about this time frame. And if they're just now getting to where they're going to be starting hitting their stride, wow, it's going to be insane to watch. But for right now, if you look back week to week, it seems like we're talking about William Byron leading laps, being in the top 10 every week, it seems like. It's no different this week with the way we're going back to the starting grid being based on the metrics that NASCAR has in place. We can expect to talk about Hendrick a lot here in a few minutes when we're talking about the race this weekend in Sonoma. So
where track position is really key.
Yeah, they're putting themselves week in and week out in positions to really take advantage of what they've built so far, and we're seeing it with wins from Bowman already having 2. Everybody's got to win in that stable. It's insane to see how utterly consistent they've been.
We've talked about this in previous episodes, but I think this would be kind of fun to kind of just check in how we're doing throughout the season. Obviously, Larson's the number 1 guy. I mean, and any team right now at all. I mean, he's just been flat out dominant all season. I mean, I would say he is the best. That is the best team right now. You might make an argument, well, Truex has more wins or Denny Hamlin's the points leader, but I think everyone can agree Larson is the top guy. So if he's the top guy in the whole field, and then he's obviously the top guy at Hendrick, I'm kind of having a tough time figuring out who's really the second best driver. I mean, going into the season, Chase was number 1. He should be number 1. He would be at least in my opinion, he should be the number 2 guy, just kind of statistically. But at this point, I mean, I've seen a lot out of. I mean, Bowman's got another victory on him. He's got 2, and then, like you said, William Byron's been in the top 10 basically every single week. I mean, where do you have those guys kind of ranking up in your Hendrick order? As far as like performance, not necessarily a pecking order, but
Isn't it great to have the conversation about this from one team? It's crazy to see it because I remember back in the day you had Earnhardt Jr., Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon, and that's what we talked about a lot. But now you're talking about these guys. These are up-and-coming guys that are establishing themselves. Chase Elliott's already really established himself, but now you really see these up-and-comers, and it's really difficult for me. I've got to put Chase Elliott at the top. He's Mr. Consistent. He's the former champion. And then looking at it between Byron and Bowman, those guys are neck and neck. It's very difficult. The consistency's been there more so for Byron overall this year, but Bowman has 2 wins. So it's really fine balance. it's a very awesome situation if you're Rick Hendrick sitting there with this situation. Is like he's going to be able to keep them all. It sounds like too because they're trying to lock in Bowman. So I right now if I had to do it, I would put Larson, Elliott. Of course, I would have to go ahead and put Byron over Bowman, but it's very, very difficult. How would you do it?
I would actually go Larson, Byron, Elliott, Bowman. And right now, Elliott, in my opinion, is just barely above him. Now, I think after this week, there might be a clear sort of gap. But I'm kind of taking some points off from Elliott because he should be with the team, coming off a championship. They still got the same crew chief. I'm discounting some of what he's done. I'm not giving him as much credit because it's like you've been a little bit more inconsistent. Bowman has been obviously the most inconsistent throughout the whole season, but here lately he's been pretty consistent. He's been running top 10, top 5 the last couple weeks, and obviously the win a few weeks ago. So I would still have him at 4th, but I'm counting their success kind of against Elliott. It's like, well, hey, these guys are way outperforming what they did the last few years. And Elliott seems to be almost taking a little bit of a step back compared to how he was kind of running later in the year last year. So, yeah, I would actually put Elliott 3rd. I think Byron and that team, they're just cruising right now. And I think once playoff comes, all that stuff, the experience of Elliott and that team, his crew chief, that's where we'll see him really elevate. And it's a little hard to say this, but I think they will even elevate themselves past the 5 team. I'm sure they're saving a little bit more for the playoffs. And Elliott's got some really strong tracks there. So if they hit it just right, Larson might be finishing 2nd quite a bit. I still think he'll be good. But that's kind of where I would set that Hendrick order, which, again, is a little crazy to think. But, yeah, I think Byron has been better this year than Elliott.
It's we're getting close to that halfway point, and we're going to be into an AllStar break before we know it, and all of that's going to be falling into place. But it's one of those things where we look back and we're understanding a little bit more about the season. This is something where we've already been through a couple road course races where we'd typically be done, but this season there's 7 of them. So there's a lot of different things happening this season, a lot of different narratives, especially going to the Gen 2 car. There's so much at play. Is it something where when we're going into this, getting ready to go into this break, what are you looking at? Are you watching anything these last couple weeks to kind of gauge things headed into our playoff stretch coming here before we know it?
I think you mean the next gen car. We are way past the Gen 2 car.
Oh, did I say? Oh, yeah.
You said Gen 2. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, next gen.
The next gen car. Sorry, after you said that, I kind of phased out. I was a little confused where you're going, but I think there's a lot of really good teams setting themselves up for the playoffs. I think once you remove Hendrick, if we're just saying overall, I think Kyle Busch is probably the next best guy up and coming. I would have said Truex a few weeks ago, but he has not been really good on those 550 packages. He's been really strong on the 750s. We know that. So at those type of tracks, look for him to be good. But I've seen Kyle do it on the 550s. He's been strong. He's been strong on the road courses with that 750 package. And obviously it's Kyle Busch. I think he's – you can't quite say he's back because he hasn't really dominated a race yet. But this is as close to classic Kyle Busch as we've seen in basically a year and a half. If they keep this thing rolling, watch out.
Yeah, we've got a handful of races left to go before the playoff crunch time. I'm excited to kind of see if he gets on a little roll here. And Sonoma road course action, he's no slouch.
It's good for you because he's still alive and is your champion.
He was somebody we picked in one of our earlier episodes back in episode 3, I think. We're kind of doing our season predictions. You can go check that out if you want to see some old content. But getting back to it, and we saw quite a few tweets on Twitter showing us some winning lineups, and we absolutely love to see that. It's something that makes us feel good, like our content actually is relative to what's going on that week. And we were really bullish on Kyle Larson, and hopefully you were too, because that really helped us cash. I had a decent weekend. Jeremy, I think you did all right, but you might have went some other routes
I
too.
just went a different strategy. I stand by everything that I said in the podcast. I just kind of faded a little bit of my own advice, and it was one of those plays where it's like, if we don't get what everyone was practically expecting. I heard a lot of people talk about Larson being the guy. It just made sense. I thought, okay, if there's one driver that could be up there that's being overlooked and dominate the race, I thought it was Chase Elliott. So I went a little heavier with Chase Elliott. Didn't have quite as many Larson lineups. So the Larson lineups I had, obviously they cashed. Just not the best combination with some of the other drivers in there. I liked Kurt Busch some. He was in a few lineups. He had the engine problem. I think the one of the belts popped off and then basically killed the motor. I mean, he was running good when it happened. So
and that happened to his teammate too, Chastain.
Yeah, luckily they were able to save it. They got back out there, but obviously, many laps down, they just did what they could do. So I mean, not a bad day. I mean, basically recouped about half of my entry fees, which is cool. Still alive to play another week. That's bankroll management. That's what we try to preach here for you guys too. Not every week is going to be an ace in the hole. You're going to get it wrong a few times, or some people are going to get it just a little bit better. You just manage that. But I feel pretty good about this week at Sonoma. I saw some people, and I agree, I saw some people kind of commenting soft pricing from DraftKings, but I like it because we had so many ties and so many contests last week. Everyone was pretty much targeting the same, 10, 12 drivers, maybe 15. So this week, I think there's so many drivers in play, and you're going to have to be really strategic. So I'm definitely looking forward to this week. And I like road courses too, so...
Yeah, and that's why we're here. We want to give you information to have different strategies. We talk about GPP and cash games in our comments when we're breaking down these races because, like Jeremy alluded to, there's different ways to cash, and being different and contrarian and having an 18% owned Chase Elliott versus a 56% owned Kyle Larson, there's a lot less people out there with the combination of lineups, and if he would have had the opportunity to dominate, he would have been taking home a lot more money because there were less people playing him. So there are different strategies, different ways to approach it. Some weeks might allow you to go a little bit more heavy in the cash game and feel comfortable about it. And sometimes GPP, you want to take a little bit more of a risk and try to see if you can't hit a bigger home run.
Because it is NASCAR at the end of the day. You never know when a caution is going to come out. You never know when someone's going to get in the wall or a flat tire or loose wheel. There's so many things that are out of even the driver's control and obviously out of our control. Sometimes you got to play the riskier lines, and when it hits, and it's hit for me, it's hit for you before, it's a really nice day.
Yeah, and we try to allow it to where you can understand who might be beneficial to play in as an alternative to some of these other drivers that everybody's on, because unlike most sports, there's mechanics involved and there's a lot of electrical. There's just so much unknown that is out of the athlete's ability and control compared to a lot of the other sports, that nothing's guaranteed in this sport. We understand that, and we try to help you understand, hey, there are alternative ways to be able to hit some of these high roll, tournament targets. It's not easy, doesn't always work, like Jeremy said, but if you know how to manage it, at the end of the day, if you can grow your bankroll, it's always great.
Some of these issues that these guys can have throughout a race, all of them, it's almost equivalent to a star player blowing out his ACL in the NFL or something like that. Or, same thing with basketball. I mean, it could be an injury like that, but I'd say that those happen even more frequently, obviously, than those star players getting hurt. So you are always taking a bigger risk, but I think that's what makes this sport more fun and really opens up the door just for, more excitement towards the end of the race too, because things can change really quick. We've been on the side where we were looking good with 2 laps to go, and the caution comes out, and our day goes from really good to bad, and we've been on, well, today was a wash, and then next thing you know, caution comes out, and we're like, all right, let's carry this into the next week. So, yeah, we both like it for that aspect, the dynamics of the DraftKings aspect, in combination with the chaos of that NASCAR usually brings.
It adds an extra layer of an excitement to an already exciting sport, and I think we can both agree that it's just something that just makes it a little bit more fun and enjoyable. And you have when you have that added layer of excitement to it.
So, what was your biggest? We'll kind of exclude Larson from any of this future questions. What was sort of your biggest takeaway from the Coke, or your biggest surprise? What kind of stood out to you the most, or was there really anything?
Outside of Larson, and it was nice to see kind of Kyle Busch charge through the field and actually have a steady day. He didn't look like he was had very many issues. It looks like they might be getting some stuff together, like we talked about, where they might be getting on a little run. It was something I just noticed that, hey, they might be putting some pieces together.
I was most surprised by the just poor effort from that 19 team. Martin Truex, that was another guy that took a little ownership away from Larson. He was only a few years removed from leading every lap but 6 a few years ago. And then for him to finish 29th after starting 8th, I don't know exactly. I know he was running better than that most of the day, but not much better than that. I don't know what's going on with that team, or what was happening with that team in the Coke 600, but that was the biggest, I think, sort of surprise for me. Kurt Busch, I mean, we touched on it already. Shocker, but not. I mean, mechanical issues happened. That's not what Truex was dead in the water before any sort of major mechanical thing may have happened.
And you mentioned those couple names, and they're going to be very impactful this week as we go into Sonoma, because, like we alluded to earlier, there is the metric that is going to be dictating the starting grid that's already been applied. Right. And so we've got Kurt Busch starting 30th and Martin Truex starting 19th. 19th is where he's at. He is at the top of the salary board in DraftKings because of that starting position. And we were just at Circuit of Americas a couple weeks ago. We talked a lot about road course history, road course action. There's a lot of good nuggets there if you want to check out the COTA episode 2. We talked a lot of stats and statistics there. If you just want to go check that out, the link's above. But we get into it now. We're in a similar situation because now I don't know how much the COTA data should be applied to what we're doing because of how much impact the rain had on it. There was a lot of things that played out there, so there's still variables to take into it. Also, they didn't race here in 2020 because of the pandemic. They shifted the race out in California completely. So we have 2019 data.
I think I believe they swapped it out for an extra Darlington race. I think that's what ended up happening.
I'm pretty positive that's right. Either way, we didn't have racing action last year. 2019, they introduced the carousel into the mix, so we've got a little bit longer track. So it's a good passing corner too. You have the ability to set yourself up, cut the guy off on the inside, and kind of carry that through to the next corner. It's obviously a little bit of a risky move, but it is a legit passing corner on a course that is traditionally pretty hard to pass at. It's a tight course. It's not that wide, and it really comes down to outbraking your guy into that corner. And we'll see, I'm sure, several people spinning out throughout the race, whether they get bumped or they just do it themselves. It's a very technical track. It's very it's a challenging track. You definitely have to be a wheel man to do well here, and that's why when you start digging through some of the recent results, you see some of the biggest names of the sport up towards the top. You don't see typically these lower guys or inexperienced guys really get up there and dominate this race because it's tough. It's definitely difficult. There's 12 turns on the track, so not as many as at Circuit of the Americas where there were 20. But the number of laps is 90. It's a 220, almost 227-mile race, so we don't have a lot of laps. The length of the track's 2.5 miles, roughly 2.25 or 2.52. There are not very many performance points available. That is something that is going to be impactful as we're looking at how we're going to construct lineups, who has the value. There's basically going in, looking at it, talking about Martin Truex. He was the 2019 winner, 2018 winner. He's got a lot of stuff really looking sharp headed into the week. What are you expecting, especially with his starting position?
Well, first, I kind of just wanted to say I like when there's not a ton of performance points. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like when the races are long, there's a lot of laps, Martinsville and stuff like that. But from a DraftKings perspective, with like example like a Coke 600, there's so many laps, and if you try to do a different play, and if one guy in particular does really well and you don't have enough for any of them, your day is done. You don't, even if a guy gets out front and leads all the laps, he might make the optimal, but you can still have a good day depending on what your lineup looks like, because you might have a better strategy than what they had. So it really, in my opinion, opens the door for a broader range and more drivers to be used in your lineups that can actually win you money. You don't have to be as particular, like, nope, you got to lock in Larson, or you got to lock in, Chase Elliott or Kyle Busch. It doesn't matter as much. But saying that, I think Truex is as close to a lock as you could probably have for this race, but not because I think he's going to dominate and lead the whole race and get all of the fastest laps. It's because of the different strategy that's needed for this race. And in my opinion, that strategy is place differential and in combination with finishing position. So if you have some good place differential upside, but you still don't get that a higher place finishing position, some tracks it wouldn't matter as much, but here it really does. You are trying to find those guys, ideally you would like to have the guy from first who finishes first through sixth in your lineup, because that's going to really maximize your potential. And with Truex starting 19th, even if he gets up to fifth, maybe leads a handful of laps through some strategy, if he can't race his way all the way up there, he's going to be one of the top value guys on the board just because of that finishing position and the place differential.
Yeah, that's one of the key things to look for this week is place differential. Since there aren't a lot of performance points available this week, that's just something to consider for sure, because I can also see a path where we've got Mr. Kyle Larson on the pole again and him taking an opportunity to lead a couple stages, and he has 40 laps led, and that's where you need him to be to have value. So there's an alternate path there as well.
But he also has to finish good.
Exactly, and that's really to the point too. He almost has to win for him to achieve that value. Very difficult, but some of these other drivers we're going to get ready to talk about, there are some drivers that do have that path a little bit easier than others.
Yeah, on a normal mile and a half, if you were to lead 50% of the laps and if you started, let's just say top 3 and you finished 10th, that's a good guy you want in your lineup. Even with that negative place differential, it's still going to be enough because he led so many laps. You lead 50% of the race here and you started first, second, or whatever, and you finished 10th. It's still good because those points still matter, but it's not as much. We're only talking about 40, 45 laps. It is a different strategy when it comes to these shorter races, road courses, I should say.
So let's go ahead and talk about Chase Elliott. He's the next guy on the salary board for DraftKings. He's $10,500 starting second. We talked about him and Truex a lot leading up to Coda as well, since we were there just a couple weeks ago. Chase Elliott ended up winning. He's starting second. He's in a position where he's the second most expensive. We were just kind of talking about that. Is he worth putting in your roster, or are you kind of looking at kind of fading him this week? How is that?
Well, there's no way I'm fading Chase Elliott this week at all. Until he shows me that he's not capable of being a top 5 or top 10 car at road courses, which doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. There's no way I'm fading him, no matter where he's starting at. But I may not go quite as heavy on him as I typically would. And mainly because he's been good at Sonoma, but he hasn't been great. Now, if we look at the last 3, his data is skewed because in 2019, with the track configuration that they're running this year with the carousel, he was up front. He led a couple laps, not much. He was mostly behind Truex, but he was running second, third for a good portion of the day. And I think what happened was just the roughness of the track, going over all the bumps and whatnot. They had some sort of engine issue that ended their day. I think they got 60 out of 90 laps, somewhere around in there. So he was running good, but the finish is obviously going to skew the data because he finished, almost last. Or he may have actually been last or second to last. So overall, in the last 3, that's going to skew his data, but he does have a top 5 and 2 top 10s. So the other 2 races prior to last year or 2019, he was good. Not particularly dominant. He's only averaging about 3 fastest laps, only getting about a lap led. So again, he's been good, but he's not been Watkins Glen type good or even the Roval type good. So I don't know, because one thing I'll go a little out of turn. The biggest thing that concerns me about Elliott is the guy he's starting behind, and that's Larson, because Larson has earned the last 3 poles, and then he's obviously getting his 4th pole this week because of the metrics, but he earned 3 poles prior to that. He can get around this course. He just, I guess with the Ganassi equipment, couldn't really maintain pace, so he doesn't have the best results here at Sonoma. But he's in much better equipment this week. So I think for Chase to reach value, he has to get out front and lead laps because he's the second most expensive guy. He has no PD upside since he's starting second. So if Larson gets out and dominates and takes all, even if he ends up finishing bad, but if he gets out front and leads most of this race, and Chase can't get up there and do it, he's not really going to be worth it. Even if he finishes second or leads the last few laps and wins, it is a tough play, just mathematically for him. That's my biggest hesitation with Elliott.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other guys that just, especially with the price tag, offer a better route to value, and you summarized it perfectly because I feel very strongly about that as well. Check out our race day rundown on Sunday morning before the race because we give the full impact score, and we differ a little bit on that, but I think I'm a little bit more harsh on Chase than you are this week. Kyle Busch, though, next 10-3, starting 5th. He's somebody that came on strong, looked good at COTA. He's no slouch at the road courses. There's a lot of data we can look at for that. I think this could be a week where you could find him with a little bit less ownership because there's some guys below him that have a little bit more PD, but it could be a play very similar to Chase Elliott where it's going to be a little bit more challenging for him to reach value. But, oh, man, I want to have some exposure more in GPP tournament scenarios for sure. It's not a cash game play for me, but he's strong.
I don't know about the ownership for Kyle Busch because I don't really know how most of the people are going to view this slate. You're right. There's people around him on the salary board that have the better PD upside. But when you dig into his statistics here, in the last 3 races, his average finish is 4th. Mm-hmm. He has 3 top 5s. He's 100% for top 5s. He's been really strong. I think this is probably his best road course out of any of the places that he's raced at in the Cup Series. Really good here. They're really peaking strong. He was really good at COTA, even in the rain. He won the Xfinity race at COTA. He's, like I kind of said earlier, he's kind of coming back to that classic Kyle Busch form.
Getting his swagger back a little bit.
So I don't know if when people see him sitting there at that price tag, if they're going to dig into the stats and see how good he's been here recently, if they're going to look at some of his stats the last few years overall and be like, wow, he hasn't been as good or he's been too inconsistent, or if they're going to be like, oh, well, that strategically may not be the best play because there's better PD upside. I don't know if that's how a lot of people view it or not. So I think Kyle Busch may be a little higher on than what you allude to, because the stats, like I said, they speak for themselves. But I do like Kyle Busch a lot. I mean, for those reasons. This is one of his best track. In the last 3, he's the 3rd best driver according to driver rating. So really strong for old KB 18.
Yeah, I think I am going to be a little bit more heavy on the next guy. I think most people are. Joey Logano starting 10-1, priced at 10-1, starting 13th. He is somebody that's looked a little bit more strong on road courses here recently. He is got way better opportunity to reach value with starting 13th. He has that place differential that we're looking for and have talked about multiple times. And man, it's just going to be hard to try to find guys that offer any more place differential in that price range to be able to reach that path of value. What do you think looking at Logano this week? How's it shit stack up?
I know that you are higher on Logano than I am this week. And I can certainly make the case from your point of view as well. He was strong. He led quite a few laps at COTA. He led at the Daytona road course earlier this year. 750s overall. He's been really good. He won the dirt race in a 750 horsepower package. So this year, when you really look at his stats, especially with this kind of package, it is really good, and there's no reason why you wouldn't want to play him, because we are looking for place differential from these higher end guys, and he does offer some of that. But I think my biggest hesitation is, at least in his past, he has struggled here. The last 3, his average finish is 18th. He only has 1 top 15, no top 10s. He's averaging 4 fastest laps and no laps led. And he ranks out as the 10th best driver according to driver rating in the last 3. And then I also kind of broke down and have the 2019 stats here in our garage thoughts, because again, it's a longer version of the track. So they added the carousel. So it's like, okay, well, let's just see if there's any discrepancy there. Well, he finished 23rd last year, and he started 3rd. I don't remember exactly what happened to him. I did watch some of the race. I didn't get to watch all of that one in the replay. But he was never really doing that good from what I saw. He had 10 fastest laps, which is good, but he didn't get out front and lead, although Truex led almost 60, so not many people had the opportunity to lead. But yeah, that's my biggest hesitation. It's more of a track history versus recent history. So I think for most people, if they're listening to this, it kind of comes down to what does your gut tell you? Do you think it's more about recent history or track history? And go with your gut. That's the best advice I could give for Logano, because I'm hesitant on him this week.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more bullish on him because of that more recent history. I think him in the 750 horsepower package, and then a little bit stronger, more steady performances at road courses. I think he might be dialing it in when that place differential is just too nice to pass up. Moving on, Denny Hamlin starting 4th. He's under 10,000 this week at $9,900. He was somebody that take a look at in road courses, and he's not a slouch. I believe he led here a little bit last year, and he's somebody that you look at the 750 horsepower package. Has been pretty strong this year too. So there's a lot of stuff to look at and dissect with him as well. Very similar to Chase Elliott and Kyle Busch in the starting position, and some of the same logic behind our strategy. I'm not going to be very high on him at that price and everything. I don't know. It's just a weird spot for him this week.
Yeah, I don't think it really works out for Hamlin this week. I mean, he really does have to get out front and lead, and he's behind 3 really good Hendrick cars. Just quickly, just to set the scene, in 2019, William Byron led the entire first stage. So he can get around it. We'll get to him. I like him a lot. But Hamlin, you're right. He did lead 4 laps, but that's literally only because he stayed out at the end of stage 2 when I think Elliott, Truex, and Kyle Busch, they came to pit. They were running 1, 2, 3 because they were setting up for the end of the race. So they wanted to get in the pits before the end of the stage. That way, once the stage ended, everyone else who stayed out would have to pit, and then they'd be back up front with fresh tires. It's smart. We're going to see a lot of that this week. I mean, we're running a different strategy than normal. Well, so are they. So it's going to get a little jumbled up. So if we take that into consideration, Hamlin, he could be the benefactor of that. He may decide to stay out and lead some laps to get a stage win if it were to fall in his lap. But unless he just come with a really, really fast car, I do not think Hamlin's going to find his way into the optimal. I mean, he started 6th last year. He finished 5th. He had 2 fastest laps, the 4-lap sled that I had mentioned. Really good driver rating, but he got 42 DK points. That's not terrible. But for even someone who's below 10K at 9.9, that's not really the value that we're looking for.
Yeah, and it's going to be something, I think, where Kyle Larson is going to be really high owned because he's next. Denny Hamlin's going to go overlooked. Could be something that in a GPP tournament, you can go ahead and build some lineups around him, and that's the way you're being different. I don't know how many people are going to be on that. I don't see his ownership being that high. I think people will go Kyle Larson, and even Kyle Larson I'm not 100% on because I think you're going to have pure domination and a strong finishing spot to achieve value starting on that pole. But you alluded to it earlier. He's done it 3 previous times starting on the pole. Can he take the experience and better equipment and make a little bit more action happen this year? We've seen him be dominant already last week. So that's something to take into consideration this week. Kyle Larson starting on the pole, 9,700.
So in 2019, he finished 10th, and he started on the pole. He led no laps. He had no fastest laps. So he ended up with 25 DK points. Obviously, that is not what you want from Kyle Larson. But the biggest difference to me is factoring in what he's done this year, because, again, we've mentioned it. We pretty much have to mention it in every episode. He's in much better equipment. We all know this. And the fact that even in that lesser equipment, he was able to go out there and earn the pole in lesser equipment tells me, okay, he can at least navigate around this track the way he needs to maintain speed. Now, can he do it lap after lap? The history would show not really. But again, you have to consider the equipment that he's in and obviously the competition around him. I think Larson is a risky play anytime. I never really enjoy playing guys from the pole. There's just so much that can go wrong and so many negative points that can ensue from that pole position. But it's really hard to pass here. If you got a fast car and you can navigate around the track, you might get out front and lead most of this race, or at least lead a good portion and maintain track position throughout the race, which I do think Kyle Larson can do. I won't be going overly heavy on him, but at that price tag and with what we've seen this year, I think Larson is certainly in play. And even starting 3 positions higher, I think a much, not a safer, but a much better play than a Denny Hamlin.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think I could see him potentially having a chance to dominate. I'm not saying, hey, he will, but I want to have a decent share of Larson this week just in case he continues this strong run and is able to finally get a road course win that I think it's really coming. I think this is the track that we could see it happen at. His teammate, though, William Byron, he's 9,500 starting third right next on the salary board. He's somebody you talked about where you like him this week too. That price tag and how fast he's been, how consistent he's been. He's been strong at road courses. You talked about his stage 1 domination last year. Man, there's a lot to like about William Byron.
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah,
in 2019, the last time they were here. There's a lot to like about William Byron. His road course stats are good. He's just been solid. I like him this week. what are your thoughts about him? Because there's some guys, once we get below him, is really where we start seeing the place differential come into play. So he's really one of these last guys that has an opportunity to be a dominator, if you will, or have an opportunity to lead laps early.
And I don't think most of the people playing in these contests will be playing Byron that way. I think Byron could be from the top guy, Truex, down to at least, let's say, Kurt Busch, who's 2 spots further down on the salary board. He might be the lowest owned out of all of them. He could literally be less than 15% owned in some of these bigger tournaments. I don't know if that's exactly how it's going to be, but it's not like he has overwhelming stats that say, yes, you got to play me. I mean, he's starting behind Larson and Chase Elliott, his teammates, and we've already documented how good they are this year, road courses, all that. Realistically, I mean, just what I'm looking at, this says this is not a good play. This is not one that you want to hammer down. But this is NASCAR. Things don't always go as planned. I know they went as planned last week, but they don't always go that way. And Byron might be one of those guys that you can sneak in there, and he could be one of the top guys that you need in your lineups. Because he could lead the first stage, or maybe he gets out front second stage. He's been much better this year than he's been in the previous years. So I won't go overly heavy on Byron because there's not a ton of upside unless he leads those laps and is fast. But I like him. I think he's kind of a sneaky play this week.
I will definitely be building some Truex and William Byron stacks in my GPP tournaments. Another guy that I am considering this week is Ryan Blaney. Starting price is $9,300. He's starting 11th. He's really where we start to see some guys with some place differential, more consistent place differential opportunities. He's somebody that looked really strong last year throughout the race and came on strong towards the end. He's been very inconsistent in some places and on the road course circuit, but here he seemed to be a little bit more dialed in.
Yeah, 2 years ago when they were last here, he finished 3rd. He was really strong. I think had gotten up to 2nd. He didn't lead any laps. I don't think he made a pass for the lead at any point, but I do believe he got as high as 2nd. He finished 3rd. Strong running. He only had 3 fastest laps, no laps led, like I already said. But he was the 3rd best driver according to driver rating. Now, if Chase Elliott's engine doesn't blow, he might finish above him. He might have a better driver rating overall. But either way, he was still really good in this race. He won the first Roval race. Now, that was because Johnson backed into Truex right on the last corner, basically. So he kind of got handed that win, but he was still in 3rd, and so he was the first guy there to take advantage of it. So he is no slouch when it comes to these road course races. But I still have a little bit of a hesitation, just like I do a little bit with Hamlin, although Blaney has that PD upside we're looking for. So he is someone that ideally we would like to target. But outside of the win he had at Atlanta and earlier on in the year, here recently, these last 4, 5, 6 races have not really been the best for Blaney. They haven't been terrible, but especially from a DraftKings perspective, they haven't really been what you're paying for. You haven't really got what you need out of him. So I will, of course, play some Blaney lineups, but I may also go a little lighter on Blaney because I would much rather have the guy below him we'll talk about in just a second. But that's kind of my point of view. I know Blaney seems to kind of be our biggest sort of difference in the way we view some of these drivers week in and week out. You know, I always see your point and your side of the argument, but I also see it my way too, you know, and we've both been right throughout the last few weeks. But just to me, from what my eyes have been telling me, he's been really good NASCAR-wise, but DraftKings-wise, much riskier play.
And we'll have to find out come Sunday if it's worth it. I think it offers some place differential at a little bit of a discount from Logano. But You did mention Kurt Busch. He's starting 30th, 9,100. He had a bad week last week. His teammate Chastain did as well. They had mechanical issues, nothing of their fault at all. So they are starting towards the back. And Kurt Busch, he's pretty strong here in Sonoma. He's got a couple top 10s in the last 3 here. He's not a bad road course racer at all. This kind of fits his style of racing, and starting 30th, he's pretty much going to be chalk. But definitely somebody you want to pay attention to.
Again, it kind of will be interesting to see what some of these players, how they view Kurt Busch, I should say, because he's had some DNFs this year. He's had some runs just where he hasn't been that good. I mean, kind of on paper, he's just been kind of so this year, and he's been in similar spots where it's like, man, he's good here. He's got a lot of PD upside, and it hasn't always paid out. And that can be the case here as well, because again, it's a tough track to pass. But if he is able to keep it clean in those last 3 races that you had mentioned, his average finish is 8.7. That's really strong. He doesn't have a top 5, but you don't need Kurt Busch to get a top 5. You don't even really need him to get a top 10. I mean, if he can get a top 15, but around that 11th to 13th place, if he can get a solid run there, I think the team would be happy given the last few weeks how they've gone. Get them kind of back in the swing of things. And from a DraftKings perspective, that's exactly what you want from someone starting 30th and fairly soft pricing. What'd you say it was? 9,100?
9,100.
I mean, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure he should be the highest. Maybe besides Truex, he should be the highest owned driver. I do like Kurt Busch a lot, but we will see how that one shapes out.
Going on to Kevin Harvick, 8,900 starting 8th, and somebody else that's been, if you look at the data, very strong at road courses. I'm just based on my eyes this year and some of the data, I'm not super high on Harvick because we can look at the data and how strong he's been over the last couple of years, even here. But looking at recent data with this year's setup and just Stewart-Haas as a whole, it just hasn't been what we thought it could be or kind of expected throughout the entirety of the year. Sure, they've had strong top 10s and they've been consistency. We just haven't seen the, opportunities to be up there competing for wins and being in the mix every single week like we're used to, at least recently. And it's just not been what we've kind of expected out of Kevin Harvick.
Definitely not what we expected out of Kevin Harvick. I'm very surprised. At the beginning of the season, I wasn't too surprised because teams can get off to a slow start, but they've been doing at this for a while. And we were 15 races in now, I think. He has not looked anything close to what he looked like last year. But there is a case to be made for Harvick. Personally, I don't think I will be playing much, if any, Harvick, but here's the case. In the last 3 races, his average finish is 3rd. That includes 1 win, 2 top 5s, and obviously 3 top 10s. Very strong, averaging 16.3 fastest laps and 19.7 laps led. His average DK points in those last 3 races is 65.8, and he's the second best driver according to driver rating behind Truex, and he's got 120.6. And his average starting position has been 13.7. So very strong. Very strong. This is we've documented before, Harvick is no slouch when it comes to road courses. Kind of sneaky because he's not usually the focal point in these races, but he has been strong. Obviously, we won't even consider Coda because of the wreck early on and finishing basically last, whatever it was. But again, with that starting position, that salary, I think he could be a nice cash play, maybe if you could want to go that way. But I think if I'm going to do anything with Harvick this week, it might be if I can see some favorable head-to-head bets. But from a DraftKings perspective, I don't think I'm going to end up with much Harvick, but there is a case to be made given his history at this track.
Well, Alex Bowman's going to be in an interesting spot too because he's roughly the same starting position, starting 7th, 8,700, a little bit of a discount, a little less place differential. His stats at road courses are in the middle. He's viable. He's a top 10 candidate. Man, these guys right here are going to be very difficult to want to try to fit in your lineups between Harvick, Bowman, and then the next guy, Keselowski. Keselowski's 8,500 starting 9th. To me, these three are very, very similar plays, if not identical plays. And they're guys that you could interchange in your core three if you're doing any sort of tournament plays or something along those lines to kind of be different. I just don't know if I really want to have much exposure this week to any of those three guys.
You can certainly make the case for any of those guys. Brad, he's got an average finish of 11.3 in the last three, including a top 5. Bowman, average finish of 11.5, so him and Brad are right the same. So place differential is going to be the biggest upside on Harvick, or finishing position and just results overall. But, yeah, when you factor in what they've done this year, recent history, things like that, they're all about the same and more than likely won't find their way in my lineups too much. But again, if you want to try to be a little contrarian or think that, hey, maybe this race gets a little bit more chaotic than what we're expecting, all three of those drivers are more than capable of giving a solid finish. I would probably put Bowman as the weakest out of those three that we talk about. But again, that Hendrick speed this year, that might kind of equal out sort of that overall road course talent.
And that's where we differ. I have him as the strongest out of those three, so you'll have to check back for the DK impact score in our race guide. That's always available in the links below. But moving on to Christopher Bell, he's 8,400, starting 20th. He's somebody that we both really like in his position. Place differential is a big key. He's also a road course winner earlier this year at the Daytona road course. This is a nice spot for him. He hasn't been really relevant the last few weeks from a DraftKings perspective. So this week we get an opportunity to dabble with the Christopher Bell again. He's in the race guide I just mentioned. He's one of our green flags in our driver spotlight. So there's some data you want to probably talk about a little bit on him, or what are you looking at from Christopher Bell this week?
He's a tough one to really kind of figure out. He's kind of been all over the place this year. He's had races where he's looked really, really strong, and then other races we expect him to be strong, and he was terrible. I think it's part of it still, with the new crew chief, even though he's a veteran, Adam Stevens, it's still a new combo. We saw this with William Byron when he first got Chad Canal, so I think there was a bump, but it wasn't the bump that we were expecting. They still kind of struggled. But he did have that win at Daytona. But he doesn't have any experience at this track. There's a few drivers here who have no experience at this track. I mean, just from the numbers, Bell is a really good play. That's why we made him our green flag. He's right in that nice spot for the PD upside and the price tag. I think he's the best around anyone who's around him in that similar spot. But I am a little... I don't know what we're really going to get out of Bell. I know that there's upside there. There's a lot of upside, but there's also hesitation on my part just because he has been a little inconsistent this year. So it's semi-risky, but obviously we both like his upside, the value potential that he offers this week.
Yeah, we can agree to that because Matty D starting 8,200, he's 17th. He's in an interesting spot because he hasn't raced here in solid equipment before, and he's somebody you look at the data is an interesting spot whenever it comes to road courses. He's pretty flexible and can get around. But 17th with some better equipment and him fighting in 2019 in lesser equipment in the top 5, just all that. This is interesting. I don't think I'm going to be too high on him, but 17th offers some nice place differential and some value there.
Well, I've heard many times on Matty D's podcast, Not Another Racing Podcast, which is great. Definitely check that out. It's you get a lot of kind of almost behind the scenes sort of driver, what the drivers kind of can go through. So great podcast, great listen. But he has said, and I didn't even pick up on this till he said it, and then I kind of looked at the data. I was like, okay, I get what he's saying. Even in quote unquote lesser equipment, he stated that the Levine family road course package that they brought was just bad fast. It was good. And he expected that similar speed, similar type equipment when it came to Penske. Yeah, it's Wood Brothers, but it's basically a fourth Penske car at this point. At least that's what everyone says. And he said they're off. Penske as a whole is off. I think it was the Daytona road course when they were talking with like Brad. He's like, yeah, I think we're probably about a 7th place car. And I think they ended up finishing a little bit better, but that's about where they were running most of the day when they weren't in the grass, of course. So on paper, I mean, you're right. I mean, Benedetto, he started 19th last year. He finished 4th in that lesser equipment. I really would like to see him get up front and be strong again, but I just go back to what the driver said from his own mouth, that Penske as a whole, they are not where they need to be or where they want to be with this road course package. That may continue even into this race. I don't know. Obviously, I don't wish that for Matty D, but I mean, we can't build our lineups on just wishes. You know, we gotta really look at the data. I think he's worth throwing in some lineups because I think even in that lesser equipment, he can find his way up to potentially 13th, maybe be pushing the top 10. If he's pushing the top 10, he's going to be a nice value and he can help you win some money. But that's my biggest hesitation on him, is even he's not that confident in what they can bring to the track at this point.
Well, Tyler Reddick, 88,000 starting 10th. He's a interesting spot because we saw him take the pole at COTA, but he doesn't have a lot of great road course history prior to that, and he doesn't have much, or if any, Sonoma history at all. So it's going to be an interesting play starting in the top 10.
Yeah, I think Reddick he's good. I like him, but there's not a lot of upside. I think you're just looking for kind of just hoping he can kind of maintain maybe about an 8th, 7th place finish. If he can do that, that's decent. Maybe he's able to do a little bit better, but there's not really much to say about Reddick this week. The guy that we're going to end up talking about a little bit more will be the next guy on the list, Eric Almirola, who starts 26th at the back yet again, 7,900 this week. He's got good road course history here. When we start looking at his stuff, let's see, where is he? Oh, that's not the one I was looking for.
So here, the last, he's got a couple starts where he's finished in the top 10 both times.
8.5.
8.5 is his average finish. It's somebody to take a look at. Even though he hasn't had the strongest finishes here recently, we should see some hopeful pickup out of that equipment. We don't know. Man, he's offers a lot of place differential this week, which is not anything out of the norm.
Say every week.
Not anything out of the norm for this season, but is it something you're a little bit more comfortable based on some of the data previously to want to roster him a little bit more? Because,
well, a little bit more than basically none is still not that much, and yes, that's probably about where I'll still end up with him.
Because I view him almost like Ross Chastain, because I think a lot of people after Ross Chastain's performance at COTA are going to get that warm fuzzies, seeing a couple place differential better even at 29 or starting 29th. But man,
well, I think if you just chalk him up as the season overall, Chastain has just run better, and he hasn't even run that great this year, but it's just been a lot better than Almirola. So you get a little bit better PD upside, a little cheaper salary. Sometimes that $200 can make a big difference. I mean, depending on how else you construct your roster. So for me, if I'm choosing between the two, I am for sure going to pivot more towards Ross Chastain. And if I'm in a GPP, if I'm picking between Reddick and Almirola, they're completely different plays. I might even tend to go a little bit more towards Reddick. But again, that's GPP. If you're going cash, I would still go Almirola between those two. But I like Ross Chastain a lot more than Almirola. Even in times where he's looked good during the race, something happens, something breaks, he wrecks or gets wrecked. I mean, we say it almost every week at this point, but I don't really know what to do with Almirola. He's in a good position, but yet time after time, he doesn't deliver.
And I think a lot of people feel that way about him. Why I'm fairly comfortable playing him this week, because I think he's offers an opportunity to be a little bit different. I know Michael McDowell and Cole Custer are the next two guys on the list. They're very similar in price and starting position, but I think a lot of people will look at Michael McDowell's prowess on the road courses and his recent history this year and really go heavy on him in ownership. And Cole Custer might be able to sneak in there a little bit and you get a little bit less ownership. He's got some decent road course history as well. Not as good as McDowell, but fairly confident in his abilities. So what is your viewpoint on those two guys with very similar starting position and salary?
They're basically the same play. I don't really have too much differences. I would lean a little bit more to McDowell because Custer doesn't have any racing experience here, where McDowell does have racing experience here. But you're right. Equipment-wise, Custer's a little bit better equipment. He's not terrible on road courses. He can find his way around. I just still would lean McDowell, but to be honest, I don't really like either of them that much. There's some other plays down below that I would rather take a risk on because of the cheaper salary. So I don't know how much McDowell or Custer I'll end up on. And a guy that I will probably have 0% ownership on will be the next guy. Austin Dillon, starting sixth at 7,400. It's not that I don't think Dillon hasn't been running good this year. It's not even that I don't think he can finish a decent race here at Sonoma. I just don't really see the upside. I don't see him finishing any higher than fifth. I think fifth would be his absolute ceiling. I just think there's too many other good road course racers with even better equipment that will find their way around Austin Dillon. I think Austin Dillon's probably a 10th to 13th place car, which is still a good day for them. I think they'll be happy with that kind of a run. I just don't see how he helps your lineups.
Yeah, and if you're going with that approach, I would feel a little bit more comfortable with Chris Buescher in his place instead of that. I'm not really overly confident on Chris Buescher. He's been very consistent this year, and he's somebody I might have as a filler to try to get that higher finishing position. He has a little bit of place differential, and at that price tag, it might work. So might have a little bit of him. Eric Jones is kind of in the same boat, in my opinion. These guys don't have the most crazy stats that jump out at you, but they have consistency this year that might allow you to kind of sprinkle them in some GBP scenarios, but not guys that I'm super high on.
Yeah, I think Chris Buescher's a fine play. It's a fine price tag. I think he could move up a few spots. I'm not expecting too much out of him, but that's kind of what Buescher does. You don't expect too much, and then you get a little bit pleasantly surprised. And when you expect a lot, he doesn't deliver. So I think he's in a decent spot. I don't love him. Eric Jones, I think, is in a tough spot, who would be the next guy on the salary board. But I think my next favorite guy to potentially roster would be Chase Briscoe, 6,900, starting 25th. I believe he's going to be running the ARCA series this weekend because Xfinity is going to be in mid-Ohio. There's no truck race. He doesn't have any experience here, so the fact that he's going to at least get in an ARCA car and turn some laps, it's not the same as practice, but at least it's going to help him. And we know from his Xfinity history, he's really strong at road courses. So starting 25th, I think he could be that potentially one of the best plays from here on out of guys that we'll talk about. He's got the PD upside. He's got the talent. He's got the equipment. We know Clint Boyer has run good here and previously in this team, in this car. So for me, I think Briscoe would be kind of that next best guy after those guys we just got through talking about.
And he would have had a stronger road course finish at Daytona if he hadn't had the issue with the hood. So there are things to like about him.
I think he finished 6th at COTA.
Yeah, I believe so.
I think something like that, yeah.
So he is very strong at the road courses, and I do like his position starting 25th, place differential galore if he is able to have a nice day. You don't really even need him to get very much of a strong finish. A 14th place finish gets you over 5x easily. Very strong opportunity to reach that. Ryan Preece and Bubba Wallace are two guys we're not super high on, but Daniel Suarez, I think, is really the next guy I would look at rostering starting 16th. That equipment seems to be pretty strong this year. He's looked strong at times in some of these races, and he's a pretty solid road course racer. Starting 16th, offers some place differential and some salary relief at $6,400.
Yeah, I think Suarez will probably be fairly highly owned. He looked good in the last time they were here in 2019 in his Stewart-Haas car. He had raced his way, I think, up to like 4th or 5th. I think they just had a pit crew penalty, I think is what it was. It wasn't even anything Suarez did. I think a guy came over. I think it was an uncontrolled tire, I think is what it was. And it wasn't even that bad. That's when NASCAR was like really harsh on that uncontrolled tire. It was like an inch too far away from you, and it's now that it was kind of ridiculous. But he was strong. He didn't have the best results overall because of that penalty, but he looked racy. He's got some PD upside, 6,400. He's kind of, for me, when we look at previous optimals, we don't see a lot of high priced with low priced guys. It's a much more balanced build. So Suarez, if he does make it in my lineups, which I think he'll make it in some, he's kind of really one of the cheapest I want to go for this week.
I think I've got a driver that I'm willing to go a little bit lower on, Anthony Alfredo, starting 28th. He gets in the 22nd position. You can get 4x value out of him. He was able to do that at COTA. He's done that at the Daytona, I believe, as well. If he can maintain and a couple guys wreck, he's worth taking a look at. But again, the balanced approach for lineup builds this week. We talked strategy earlier in the episode. We've talked about our race guide. That's going to be linked below in the comments, along with all of our social media. That is stuff that we continue to try to update throughout the week to give you the most viable information. Patreon, that is something that we've got a couple followers that have won recently here in the last few weeks utilizing that data. Jeremy mentioned garage thoughts earlier. That's for all you spreadsheet guys, there's a spreadsheet available, but it is behind the Patreon wall. So if you want to take advantage of some deeper dives into the data, it's color-coded, very helpful for breaking down and utilizing some of the information that we talked about. But, man, we went over a lot this week. I think this week there's a lot of opportunities to be different, a lot of opportunities to potentially take home a pretty solid payday. I think I'm going to go a little bit more heavy than typical. What are you looking at this week? What are you excited about?
I never really know until I actually start getting in there. I kind of like to feel it out. I try to plan my builds closer to race day just to see if there's any stories that kind of come out, any change in weather or anything like that might kind of change my opinion. I'll probably go about average entries this week, maybe a little heavier. It really just depends on how the builds start to come out. I like to use an optimizer just to kind of get a sense of where some of these guys are fitting in the lineups based on our projections. And then usually from there, if I'm seeing a lot of stuff that I like, I may go a little bit more. And if I'm not seeing a ton, or if I feel like, kind of like last week, that everyone's going to be targeting the same ones, I might back off a little bit. So I don't really know exactly where I'll end up. It'll probably be about an average week for me. But I am excited for this race. It's a fun race. Like I mentioned earlier, I enjoy road course racing. So overall, I'm just excited to be back at Sonoma.
It's going to be exciting, and there's a lot to unfold. But, man, like we said, we really went over a lot. Hopefully it was beneficial. Thanks to everybody that subscribed. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe. It helps us continue to grow. And it's just great to have that interaction with y'all whenever you're leaving comments, having questions on Twitter. That's what we're here for. But let's get the race day action going. Man, this has been fun. I'm Joe. That's Jeremy. And this is the DK Garage.